In the beginning, there was a title. This is Sunny. He is 6 years, 10 hours, and 34 minutes old. Today is his birthday. This is his brilliant older brother, his dashing and sensitive parents, his grandparents, hi Mom and Dad, his cousins, his dog, and his favorite pet chicken, Jump Jump. Sunny lives in Charleston, South Carolina, which is home to Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, the second oldest historically black congregation in the nation, known as Mother Emanuel. Since June 2015, it has been known as the site where 9 people's lives were ended by a young man who didn't know them. He was attempting to incite a race war, and they had been joining each other in prayer. And he lives 2 hours from the Savannah River site, home of the Savannah River National Laboratory. Built in the 1950s, this 300 square mile tract of land contains the world's first complete weapons-grade plutonium and uranium extraction facilities. Its construction involved the relocation of the entire towns, graves and all, of Ellington and Dunbarton, the events of which served as the inspiration for the fictional novel and subsequent film Prince of Tides. The facility now houses 5 nuclear reactors and radioactive waste treatment and containment. The products are brought in by truck, rail and ship, and leave by truck or rail across the U.S. for permanent internment. And he lives 2 hours to Tybee Island, Georgia, popular coastal vacation spot, home to celebrities and the Tybee bomb. A 7,000-pound armed nuclear bomb built in the 1950s and dropped by military aircraft that is lost in the marsh somewhere around the island. It became a bit of a joke. So back to the child. He is a growing child who is now attending school, and he has questions like, why did grandfather's sister die? And will I die too? And his mother could not give the answer that she wanted to give. She wanted to prevent his pain and his fear. And this question brought fears and pains for her too. She had not confronted the risk that her children could die before she did. She spent nearly every waking moment keeping her child alive and removing obstacles to his development. That it feels counterintuitive to even dedicate a moment to the final development of his life. It runs counter to nearly every waking instinct within a human. So as a human, the mother, in her fear, sought control and certainty. And this is what she found. The image on the left shows the population density in the United States in 2010. The image on the right shows mass shootings in the United States since the Sandy Hook massacre in 2012. There appear to be the most death and the most violence where there are the most people. The mother understood this. Indeed, there is a chance that everything we have built through the culture of our species is a product of avoiding death, specifically the terror of one's own mortality. Death anxiety drives people to adopt worldviews that protect their sense of self-esteem, worthiness, and sustainability, and allows them to believe that they play an important role in a meaningful world. This theory that the mother found fascinating, but she noticed that it creates a very linear projection for the development of our society as a species. Is this theory binding to the individual as well as the population? Are there alternative paths to addressing one's mortality, disease, war, death, that would not continually feed the defining characteristic of our nature as a struggle. And if those alternatives exist, which they must, then there must be stability within our system that supports pattern making and pattern continuation. To find answers to these questions, she looked for the only thing that they had in common besides death, and that was that patterns exist. Among humans' amazing myriad capabilities, the ability to find a pattern in a stream of data, even if none exist, is practically uncanny. Pattern identification is taught in kindergarten as a foundational learning tool, and beyond being integral to the survival of the individuals and the species, is used in every culture and profession on the planet, especially in art. Here is the behavior, but not the precise location, of the electron of the hydrogen atom. The core of a nuclear bomb. The orbit of planets in a solar system. The first photograph of a black hole. The iris and pupil of a human eye. And hippies in a circle. Patterns present certainty through repetition because we can predict what will happen given what has happened in the past. Like in music, a repeat or whole note is satisfying amongst the sharps and flats because our ear is waiting for the whole number amongst the promise laid by the fractions. Each event, a promise made or a promise kept. The mother felt she had to face mortality with clear vision for her child's sake, as well as her own, which meant she had to begin to reduce the framework and constructs responsible for the filters with which she viewed her living landscape. Yet she had to also confront the requirement of constructing an emotional and mental framework or lens for her child to experience the world. It felt counterintuitive, counterproductive, and deeply hypocritical. So she began to construct a physical model of the framework that contained the basic laws of existence: exuberance, connection, and symmetry. And the input for that model was her own experience of her landscape through the filters that she began to find within herself. She began including everything, from things that terrified her to things that gave her a great sense of joy. All of them were a part of her landscape, and whether she was prepared to acknowledge this or not, all were interdependent upon one another and would be part of the legacy of framework with which she raised her child. She built a structure to understand and teach the universe for comfort and understanding, knowing it was a fragile illusion of certainty. She built it because she is human and wonders and makes connections and builds. Exuberance. Over the past century or so, it has been observed and generally accepted that all matter, whether or not it contains mass, is comprised of one thing and only one thing. Cats, boats, black holes, Bitcoin, comedy, guns, gays, religion, rainstorms, sunny days, shooters, victims, polar bears, plastics, love, hate, and indifference are all energy. Photons of the visible spectrum, electricity, and magnetics are all the same energy traveling at different velocities. Energy travels in waves. This is a two-dimensional representation. As best as can be observed, this wave displays the generalized path of energy over time. It does not illustrate the exact location of the energy or disturbance, but more importantly shows the range of motion between the extremes, positive and negative. A complete wave of motion without the time axis is a circle, which is a close approximation of the truth, as the energy can inhibit any location within that circle at any given time and oscillates between extremes within a field. Connection. This is a Petri production that is used in algebra and physics, but for the purpose here, illustrates how extensive connections within a community of data points form a stable structure and path of energy. The connections within the structure can serve as a model to illustrate the mechanics of gravity, some aspects of general relativity, black holes, among many others. Structures follow a pattern across existence when the substrate is common and able to form connections. Patterns emerge and are a stable form of connection that, with momentum, tend to perpetuate themselves. Symmetry is described in physics as change without change. To view something from different vantage points or perspective alters the views but does not change the thing. This is a view of Europe at night from the International Space Station, and a good example of symmetry. A circle or sphere rotated around its axis does not change the fundamental properties of the circle or the relationships within it. The many facets of whatever thing you choose to focus upon may be different, but the multiple facets help to define the object or structure. The laws of nature, or the universe, don't change regardless of position in space or time. They continue. The desperate compulsion to address mass violence and struggle, quantum physics, a graduate thesis, a full-time job, and a family began to take a toll on the mother's psyche. In fact, the heart of the mother searched for definitives of meaning and action in society, culture, human instinct, and the observable universe. She only ever found repetitions of action and recoil, multiplicities of meaning, demonstrated as inverses. For every point, there was an equal counterpoint. For every fact she observed, the inverse of that fact also appeared true. As she began to frame out her universe, she found that the frames she was using prevented the larger perspective she needed. The frames themselves, as something that separates and defines, began to dissolve as constructs. The scaffolding of her psyche was dismantling as she was attempting to build upon it. Cue an existential crisis. As long as humans have been curious, they have attempted to build models to explain everything in existence in the most simple and elegant form possible, to use shorthand to define and explain the long form, quantum, or a theory of everything. The Taijitu symbol of the Supreme Ultimate, known colloquially as the yin-yang symbol, was introduced in China in 1017 by Zhou Dunyi, representing oneness and duality within the structure. The infinity symbol, or in algebraic geometry, the lemniscate, is a symbol with a long history in Latin, mathematical, and contemporary usage. Its meaning is often connected with the Ouroboros, or a snake eating its tail symbol for the infinite. For this symbol, as with the Taijitu, the twist indicates that the inverse of the structure also defines the structure. And the mandala. This is a reproduction of a mandala on the Palace of Great Happiness, the cultural and former governmental seat of Bhutan, built in 1638. The mandala is a symbol with a very broad reach, found in Buddhist, Hindu, and Maya cultures, among others. It represents the universe and is an aid to meditation. In the production of sand mandalas, the work is carried out grain by grain of sand over a period of days. Once the image is complete, the sand is ceremoniously swept towards the center of the image, gathered and poured into running water that will symbolically and physically carry it into all parts of the universe. The mother recognized that she herself, as an artist and person, was a reflection of the model she was building. She began to turn inward because she suspected that the imagery that was reflected back to her in her surrounding world mirrored that which she was reflecting into it. And she found equivalence within herself that aligned with the law she witnessed, the renewable flow of energy within her, symmetry of life and death in each breath that both defined her, violence and peace, control and release, pain and exuberance, change and constance. She remarked on the stability of her habits, cycles that self-perpetuate because they have momentum and connections that keep them stable. Habits are not easily or ever broken, but they may shift and change. If the universe were all the same thing, then her inside experience had to be the same as her outside experience, because there was no partition between them, a reflection of one another. She witnessed her soul inside of herself and in the world that surrounded her. She defined her soul by what she observed, and where she saw violence, she found violence within. Where she saw struggle and fear around her, she found struggle and fear within. But she found, too, that where she looked for grace around her, she found grace within. Her model showed that whatever question she asked of it, the answer was yes and no. The mother found the framework of the human condition relies upon not definitives, but a ceaseless field that is fragile, stable, supportive, vast, sensitive, and infinite. As it builds and constructs, so it crumbles. She could only paint a world that gave the child the perspective of beauty, change without change, continuation, and elegance. She could not present a world to her son that was free from pain and fear, because pain is change, and fear is a call to action from the energy within. But she could practice viewing the motion within the framework, and working to remove her filters with her heart as quickly as her mind created them, knowing that she would, of course, fail. Her question, how can I live knowing that I will die? How can I best try to protect my child, knowing that I will fail? Was answered by her simple breath. Just as an inhale is the first assertion a baby makes entering into the world, with each breath in, she effortlessly asserted her own existence and that of her passions, struggles, and wonders. And just as an exhale is the last action an individual makes in their existence, the mother could breathe out and make the effort to release and accept that it will go. And the breath that once entered and became a defined entity within ourselves leaves to become a defined entity of something else, and on again. Like a river or ocean flowing in all directions, wave after wave, flow is constant, and everything is. Thank you. I will turn on the lights.
I found your use of narrative really effective throughout your talk. Can you explain maybe a little bit about why you chose to kind of tell, your experience with your son as more of a third-person story?
Yeah. There were a couple of reasons. The first one, because this project had to do with being a mother, I wanted to frame it in a way that we explain things to children. And so often we explain things to children through story. And a story is a narrative. There's a beginning, a middle, and end. But I knew that for this story, there was no beginning or end. So I wanted to keep it very, very close to things that I think are important. And I don't know how my story will end. This is about me. This is, the mom. So I thought it would be very special to do it in that format. That answers your question.
beginning of the book, when you came in, was I Spy. And the words I Spy, like, very kind of strong, and it's a different kind of reflection on, you know, you didn't observe, you didn't look, you spy. Why did you choose that?
Yeah, it's it does require a little extra oomph to spy something, maybe to find it out of a field of more distracting things. It does follow the narrative of reading a story to a child. I Spy with My Little Eye is every 3-year-old's favorite game. And also the book itself can function as a discrete unit. It doesn't need the installation to operate, and the book can be used in the installation, but it can also be taken out into the real world and used not as a guidebook or a map, but something with which you can use to interface with and explore or wonder.
Can you talk about the bird's eye view and what you've discovered since you've been watching everyone go around your universe?
Yeah, that was how I originally planned the installation, was from an aerial perspective. And I'll leave it up to you to figure out what purpose the humans serve, whether they're the exuberance, connection, or flow, or all three. And I found it very interesting because humans always want to get the big picture. We go up in space and the first thing we do is look back at Earth and see how amazing it is. And so in order to get a view of what it was I was creating physically, I thought it would be important to see it from as many angles as I could.
When you started this quest, were you aware or intentionally planning, or could you guess that the end would be as much a story about you than about your son? At least that's how I'm perceiving it.
That is the end of that story, yes. I had no idea that it was really about me because, you know, although I'm the center of my universe most days, if my children are present, you know, you just focus on them completely. And it was just like this no duh moment as I'm trying to study and build this structure and learn about physics and violence and how long we've been violent as a culture and species. And it was a tremendous toll on me. I had to amend my yoga practice to be daily or twice a day just so I could even handle it. And the more I learned about it, I couldn't find a single thing that helped me help my son, except the things that helped me be a better mother were just learning about all this. And so, yeah, it worked, I guess, but not in the way not in the way I expected it to, but in the best way possible.
When I went into your space, I noticed that you had a sound piece that was very quiet and still until you had that small moment of your son speaking. And I'm kind of wondering why we didn't hear your voice in the piece that this was about, your anxieties of trying to keep your town safe. If you can speak on that.
Sure. It's very hard to hear unless there's only a few people in there, but the continuing soundtrack that goes 24 hours a day is my breath in and out. And then it's punctuated by a little refrain of song from my son. And the breath to me is kind of what flew to the top as so important to absolutely every single aspect of this whole investigation. Joe?
So I'm curious about the images that you show going around this circle, and can you talk about, they're all kind of series to me of different perspectives. Talk about that a little bit, and why you chose that.
Those are all images that that I see and I think about every day. In a sense, in that sense, they are a little bit arbitrary, but they all have, not all of them, many of them have to do with things that terrify me. There's a foundation construction for a nuclear facility. There are AK-37 weapons. There are subdivisions which talk about sprawl and the development of our planet. And I don't think any of these things are necessarily bad. I don't think going into my exhibit and viewing something as positive or negative is really an aid to moving through it. But they are along a certain pattern, which is a color wheel. So wherever you stand, you'll find your complementary color along the other side.
So some perspectives were like from eye level or close, some perspectives was like an aerial view, then other kind of dimensions. And it's kind of interesting walking around that I found myself in different perspectives. Just a comment.
Anyone else?
I was intrigued by your use of gold, and there's a number of observations. One is, I like that the breath was so, at first I was not aware of it, and my awareness of the breath came on like very gradually. And then it wasn't like not, like I really liked that level that it was at. And the, your son singing, then in case you didn't notice it, that would make you notice there is a sound piece and maybe listen more. I thought that was really effective. As I walked around, I actually took a video of walking back and forth like this in front of some of the pieces, because the color spectrum would shift. If you walk left, the color was different than if you walked right, and it was like this magical transformation within the painting of the colors from my movement. And I was curious about what the gold in that meant to you.
Sure.
And I also, just one more comment, that it was very meditative, the way I kept circling through it. There was something very, that physical relationship of navigating it was really an interesting part. But I was curious about the gold. That's the question in there.
I don't think, for me at least, that the gold overlay that I used in the paintings has any one or two readings or reasons that I used it. I definitely think of it as an embodiment of energy. It reflects light almost perfectly visually anyway, and it definitely has a continuity across the entire piece, so you can follow it all the way around, whereas the colors shift and change the gold.
So what you've done is like create kind of a model of the universe. Like you showed several other models in very different points in history. And all of those other models like exist within a specific context, whether it's a spiritual context or a scientific context. Or I guess I'm curious for you with this kind of model, this model that you constructed. In what context does that function for you? Like, is the context of like you and your son and your family, like this is a model that functions if you are aware of that, or is it a model that functions within an art context if you go in and look at through the art lens and it creates a, does that make sense?
Yeah. For me, take the model, you spin it, insert it in your brain. I can have, and I have had for the past 6 months, every day a different outcome, depending on what input I put in. ideologically, you can have different outcomes to it. And so I like that I use the model to inform myself. So it's really just a tool and not a tool.
So if it's a tool for you and your like frame, viewing the world, like how do you want it to function? Or like, or do you care like how the viewer coming into that sees your hope that it becomes a
Any
tool
way they
that
want
helps
to. Yeah. I mean, I definitely, it's quite loaded. I mean, I do have the quote at the front of the building, so when you go in, you understand that there's some kind of human connection that it's pointing to or talking about. But I think it can serve the universe.
Can you talk about the process of the easels? I went around the outside edge to kind of get a feel for how you set them up and the spacing and how open they were. I was kind of interested in the structure as well. And I saw some chalk lines. And so I was intrigued because some of them, even for larger paintings weren't, there were like two larger paintings that were next to each other. They weren't quite at the same angle. What was it like to set it up? What was your process? I'm curious.
Very involved. There are plumb lines on the floor that you can find that I didn't chalk because it is a construction that a mother is building. And the easels themselves, just like the rest of the exhibit and installation, are incredibly delicate. So if they're all nestled into each other, and if one falls, all the rest will fall as well.
You did talk a little bit about the centerpiece.
The dominoes?
The dominoes.
The dominoes!
Sort of the precariousness that they may have as well.
Sure. For me personally, this may not be a broad understanding, but for me, they symbolize flow. Howard?
I'm also curious about the easels, but mostly because I saw that you were positioning things at different heights, given the different sizes of the paintings. And I'm really interested to know why you chose easels, especially given that they're so commercial, and what your intention is to do with the easels after your installation. No,
So,
I'm interested to know in terms of you as an art maker, where they fit into your practice.
gotcha. They fit into this installation alone. I use easels because they're holding up paintings for display, and they are paintings. I'm not going to pretend that they're not. So I think it's very fitting. And the size of the panels changes because it's a sonograph, a sound wave of my child's voice.
And what will you do with them?
I'm sorry?
What will you do?
Oh, what will I do with them? I will show them to my husband and see what he thinks.
How did you choose the number of easels, which is 59? I counted.
I know I should have done 69. But I wanted to have so many that you could not take them in with visually from one position. That was very important. Joe?
So it didn't matter which way you went along this thing, along the circle. It was,
Matters for what?
I don't know, to realize the piece. You didn't intend for someone to go right to left or left to right? No? Because Wendy was going the other way, and I was like, you're all wrong. I'm on the right way.
What way are you going?
We'll read a little
Right to
bit
left.
differently whether you go left or right.
And one thing I wanted to say real quick was that I felt like I was in church, like it was a sacred type of place.
So this is maybe an unfair question, inside information, but I feel like at one point you were discussing hanging room. And I'm curious, having seen it in the space, that speaking of easels again, they're so prominent visually and they create a very distinct, like, they're almost you feel about that, and if you had the opportunity to install this again, would you try to find a way to suspend them almost like invisibly, or?
I think easels are perfect. So you used the word fragile earlier, and your talk is about wanting to create a safe environment for your child. But when I walk in there and you're talking about that once if somebody else went over and still get dominoes, I kind of wonder why you chose to still make fragile work instead of using something more sturdy.
I'm thinking about the fragility of everything, but
I just, when you say that, I just feel like, because I feel like in perspective, you were trying to make something more safer for your child, but.
thank you.
All right, everybody. So we have a reception for Kate in her space at the Gateway. So please join us over there in about 15 minutes or so. And from 7 to 7:30.